Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Friday. It's the 28th day of March, 2025. And in the headlines today, we have three stories about those who should be honest brokers working for a fair deal for Israel who are doing anything but this. For example, crazy Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont, is going to force a Senate vote on blocking arms sales to Israel. He's for blocking arms sales. It's going to be see who votes with him. This is from the Jewish News Service. Now, another problem is the so-called honest broker Qatar and this deal between Israel and Hamas. They're the ones who are negotiating. So-called honest broker is Qatar's compromised defense minister, who has said in past tweets that are now deleted, "We are all Hamas." Doesn't sound like really fair, does it? Really honest. And to make matters worse, Steve Witkoff does it again. Would Trump cut a separate deal at Israel's expense? This is from Virtual Jerusalem. Let me tell you, the Israelis are very unhappy with this guy, and for good reason. So we're going to look at this morning. And the reason we do, in the midst of all this going on, we're laying it out. And if you're new to us, the last 8 or 10 days, we've been doing two breaking news per day. You may want to watch some of them again or watch them for the first time. And also, we have a summary written about them, and not only on our app, EOW with Don Stewart. We do have an app you can get for free at the App Store, but also on our YouTube page and on our website. And in doing so, it gives you an overview of all that's going on. So much is happening right now. We're right in the midst of seeing Iran possibly being attacked by the U.S. The U.S. planes there at Diego Garcia, we've talked about that. It's a British island there in the Indian Ocean that is used as a jumping off spot to attack places. In the past, it has targets in the Middle East. Now, it can also go after the Houthis too. So you've got a double whammy here. And so that's on the horizon, and people are really looking at this, and there's story after story about, is this going to be the attack against Iran that we've been waiting for? It could be, or maybe it's just to finish off the Houthis first. We don't know. So that's big. And then with what's going on with the hostage situation in Hamas, the uptick of the fighting there in Gaza, and all the events associated with it. But in the midst of this, we've got people who are negotiating, hopefully, a fair deal for Israel. But what we're finding out, and not surprising, we get anything but this. In other words, we've got anti Semitism showing its ugly head. And in doing so, we're not surprised by this because the scripture talks about in the last days, Israel, we've signed 21 of our 25 signs. We're near the end. Israel will be isolated, hated by the world. And many times it'll come from so-called friends, as we're seeing with the United States. And two examples, a senator from Vermont, he's an independent, crazy Bernie Sanders. And then what's even worse is the envoy that Donald Trump has picked, supposedly to represent the United States and argue with Israel, Steve Witkoff, who is just really out of his league here. So we're going to talk about these three things today because they've all hit the headlines this morning. And it's a sad situation, but it's not surprising. That's why we need to pray very heavy for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, that God will protect them as they are fighting this evil enemy, Hamas. Pray that the hostages there, they'll get released, and that this whole debacle will be over for both Palestinian people and Israeli people. But right now, it's in a real mess. And some of the negotiators here, some of the people in power, are not really helping the issues. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, here's headline number one. This is from the Jewish News Service. Crazy Bernie Sanders forces Senate vote on blocking arms sale to Israel is the headline. The efforts the effort marks the first major test for the chamber's Democrats on Israel policy in the new term, since Trump has taken office. Senator Crazy Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, announced on Thursday he will force up to eight Senate votes next week on joint resolutions of disapproval aimed at blocking $8.8 billion in U.S. arms sales to Israel, citing concerns, here it goes, over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And there we go again, the same nonsense. The resolutions, which target weapon sales approved by President Donald Trump's administration, are expected to face significant opposition in the Republican-controlled Senate. However, Sanders' efforts marks the first major test for Senate Democrats on Israel policy in the new term, reported the Jewish Insider. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has clearly violated U.S. and international law in this brutal war. We must end our complicity in the carnage, Crazy Birdie said in a statement. He pointed to Israel's suspension of aid deliveries to Gaza and the destruction of parts of the Strip. Let's stop here. Why, why is this happening? It's happening simply because Hamas will not negotiate. Hamas is using and starving these prisoners, starving actually the population, will not agree to any type of compromise with the negotiators with Egypt, who's getting very mad at them. And that's why these things are happening. They never, and like we said, there are 77 resolutions. Remember, we said that the other day that the United Nations has made since October 7th, 2023, and not one has been condemning Hamas. They've made resolutions condemning Israel, but not one condemning Hamas for the massacre. So, anyway, it goes on, says the latest Trump sales provide almost 8.8 billion more in U.S. bombs and other munitions, including more than 35,000 massive 2,000-pound bombs. The United States must not continue to supply endless amounts of military aid and weaponry to the Netanyahu government, Sanders said. According to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, more than 50,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. Now, we know this figure is inflated. They include those who died with natural causes, and despite Hamas's claims, a very high proportion of these who have died are Palestinian terrorists. Unprecedented in urban warfare, that the majority are terrorists. They're not the civilian population. And let's remind everybody the war began when Hamas led terrorist attacks southern Israel, killing some 1,200 people and taking 251 hostages. They seem to forget that. Now, the article goes on to say the resolutions are unlikely to pass given the long-standing bipartisan support for Israel in Congress. However, proponents hope the debate will increase pressure on the U.S. and Israeli governments to address civilian casualties and humanitarian concerns. Why don't you talk to Hamas? Why must you talk to Israel about this? Now, the Senate, good news, overwhelmingly rejected similar measures that Crazy Birdie introduced in November when Democrats controlled the chamber. At that time, 19 Democrats supported at least one of the resolutions, while no Republicans backed them. Most of the Democrats remain in office, and their votes next week could indicate shifting dynamics on the U.S.-Israel policy. Under U.S. law, Congress can block foreign arms sales through resolutions of disapproval, though none have ever passed. And both chambers, none have ever passed both chambers and survived a presidential veto. The law guarantees a Senate vote on such resolutions, often sparking contentious debates. Now, Trump has reversed efforts by his predecessor, Joe Biden, to impose restrictions on arm transfers to Israel. The upcoming votes will test how the Democratic Party, now in the Senate minority, navigates U.S. policy towards Israel under the Trump administration. So it's going to be interesting to see who sides with Israel and who doesn't, because they have to vote. They either vote yay or nay. Sometimes these cowards abstain or say, oh, I've got to be out of town or whatever. But it's going to be interesting to see the Democrat Party. And it's sad. There's an article we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which Israel was bemoaning the fact that the Democrats used to be Israel's best friend, and they used to support Israel. And now they've moved so far to the left, almost every thing they do is anti-Israel. Now, they really changed. It's Republicans who are supporting Israel. So it'll be interesting to see. Now, the second problem here, of course, is Qatar. Qatar is, they're one of the Gulf states, and they are supposedly the honest broker of these discussions with Israel and Hamas, the United States, of course, and Egypt involved in this. Their defense minister in past tweets has said, we are all Hamas. This is from the Jewish News Service. Here's what he said. We must plan how to influence the decision makers in the U.S. He wrote this in 2021. His name is Saud bin Abdurrahman Al Thani. Got a lot of names here. We'll just call him Saud. How's that? Anyway, he said this in 2021. We must plan how to influence the decision makers in the U.S., not be honest but fair. As part of a cabinet reshuffle on November 12th, he was appointed the head of the office as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of State for Defense Affairs. So he's right in the midst of all these negotiations and what's going on. Now, over the years, Sheikh Saud posted tweets in which he supported Hamas, incited against Israel, and criticized U.S. criticized the U.S. as well as President Donald Trump. He's also called to increase Qatar's influence on decision makers in the U.S. And there's a whole bunch of posts there. I'm going to just give you a couple of what the guy has said in the past. 2014, he tweeted, "We're all Hamas." During the round of fighting between Israel and Hamas in the summer of 2014, Operation Protective Edge, Saud tweeted under the hashtags, "We're all Hamas, we're all Palestine. O Jerusalem, awake, awake. We will never succumb to the darkness. O Jerusalem, arise, rise up, revive the memory of Syrian anti-Zionist terrorist Is al-Din al-Qassam. O Jerusalem, shoot the flames of fire." Doesn't sound like a real honest broker, does it? Now, on recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, on December 6, 2017, when President Trump announced the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Saud shared a picture of Jerusalem and commented under the hashtag Jerusalem, capital of Palestine, and Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Palestine. Since the day I opened my Twitter account, this picture has been my profile banner, and I will not change it. Allah willing, due to my unshakable belief that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. Referring to Trump's decision on Jerusalem, he added, "Nobody has the right to give away something he does not own." And of course, he's deleted these tweets in the present now that he's taken this position. He doesn't want anyone to know his view on this. And this comes from a so-called honest broker. You see what Israel's dealing with here? But now to make matters worse, this is the one that really gets me and the one that Israel is upset with the most. Headline number 3, they ask a question. Would Trump cut a separate deal at Israel's expense? This is from Virtual Jerusalem. Israeli anger grows as amateurish and conflicted envoy Witkoff draws fire for his Qatar financial ties. Did you know about that? We're going to find out something interesting here. Qatar financial ties, a naive approach to Hamas hostage talks, and media miscues to anti-Semitic Tucker Carlson. Reports of a proposed U.S. deal with Hamas to secure the release of a single American-Israeli hostage, Eden Alexander, has sparked anger in Israel, intensifying existing tensions between Netanyahu government and Washington. The proposal, reportedly brokered through Qatar, honest broker, yeah, right, calls for the former U.S. President Donald Trump to issue a public statement urging calm in Gaza and renewed ceasefire negotiations. In return, Hamas would free Alexander. Israeli officials and the public have sharply criticized the limited nature of this arrangement, arguing it undercuts broader efforts to dismantle Hamas's terror infrastructure. Prime Minister Netanyahu has consistently maintained that Israel's primary objective remains the defeat of Hamas, and it certainly is. Netanyahu recently reiterated this position, stating clearly, "We will not allow a short-term agreement to strengthen Hamas's position or leave them intact." His position reflects a broader Israeli consensus, emphasizing that any negotiation or ceasefire must achieve tangible security gains and the dismantling of Hamas's military capabilities. The Israeli public, deeply invested in securing the return of all hostages, has grown increasingly frustrated at the possibility that only a single hostage, an American dual citizen, might be released as part of this arrangement. Demonstrations across Israel have underscored widespread frustration, reflecting fears that such piecemeal negotiations could encourage further hostage taking by Hamas. Protesters argue that accepting partial agreements without tangible strategic gains would set a troubling precedent, effectively rewarding Hamas for terrorist actions. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Adding to the controversy, the role played by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in negotiations has drawn considerable criticism. Witkoff, a prominent New York Jew and financially troubled real estate mogul appointed by Trump, has faced sharp scrutiny for his amateurish handling of sensitive diplomatic talks and his apparent financial entanglements with Qatar, a key financial supporter of Hamas. Now get this. In 2023, Witkoff sold Manhattan's prestigious Park Lane Hotel to the Qatar Investment Authority for $623 million, a transaction that many now claim compromises his diplomatic objectivity. Rabbi Pini Dunner, a prominent Jewish Republican leader, publicly criticized Witkoff's involvement, stating, "Unfortunately, Steve Witkoff is compromised. Qatar owns him because they saved him from financial ruin." This criticism aligns with growing bipartisan concern about Witkoff's bumbling credibility, leading to public calls for his resignation. Israel's stance remains clear. Short-term diplomatic gestures, particularly those focused narrowly on individual hostages rather than broader security outcomes, cannot substitute for a strategic plan aimed at permanently removing Hamas as a military threat. Israeli military and intelligence communities continue to emphasize only sustained pressure on Hamas. Military, diplomatic, and economic would lead to meaningful security gains. All right, here's the uptake of all this today. With friends like these, Crazy Bernie, the defense minister of Qatar, and Witkoff, Israel does not need enemies. Again, this is not surprising with respect to what the Bible teaches about Israel being isolated and hated in the last days. Sign 21 of our 25 signs will near the end. There will be a rise in anti-Semitism. The entire world will be against Israel. Like all of our material, it's a free download from our website, Educating Our World. And we want you to take advantage of this, because if you want to know what's going to happen according to the Bible at the time of the end, well, the scripture tells us this, and we've in great detail in a dozen books on Bible prophecy laid it out for you. But anyway, so the stories we get into the weekend here, it's the Sabbath coming up in Israel, the Shabbat. And you've got people more and more disgusted with Witkoff. And again, the U.S. and Donald Trump. Are you really going to just get one hostage release, an American, and just leave the others languishing there and give a ceasefire time or something else and reward Hamas for this? It's going to be interesting to see, and it's not good. And so we've got a lot of these issues coming to the forefront now, with a background, of course, of what's taking place in the Middle East right now, particularly there with Diego Garcia. And that's, again, the island in the Indian Ocean, which the U.S. is sending their B-2 bombers there, their stealth bombers. And Diego Garcia is the launching place where attacks on the Middle East that do come from the U.S., and potentially Israel could join them also there. And it's going to be interesting to see, because we've got more and more speculation on this. Now, again, there's also going to be attacks on the Houthis, because the Houthis continue to bomb almost every single day. Israel, millions of people keep going to the air raid shelters every day in the middle of the night, middle of the day. Let me tell you, it's very psychologically unbalancing. If you've ever been in a situation where there's an air raid going on, and and you've got the siren going, you've only got a few seconds or a minute or so to get to it, it's very unnerving. So we've got all that going on. So we keep in touch with that. We'll be back with you later today with any more things that have happened with respect to last day's Bible prophecy and the events and the headlines. But again, as always, we keep an eye on things, and we see things moving towards the end, which, of course, the good news is the second coming of Jesus Christ, the setting up of God's kingdom in the world, and the many events first that will precede it. But we have a great future if we're Bible-believing Christians, because God is in control of all things, as we see every single day. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. And until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.